I'm joined by Tom Horn from the Raiders News Network. Tom Horn is also the author of The Ahriman Gate. Thanks for joining me, Tom.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on your show, Alex.
Hey, we got a lot to cover tonight, and I figured the first place we'd start is a little bit about yourself and what your website is.
Well, you know, what's funny is I started Raiders News Network just as a hobby about the time that the internet was invented. If you look at me, I'm an old guy, and I'm about as old as way before the internet. And but I had thought in the beginning that I wanted to do something that nobody else was doing. My background is that I was a pastor for 20-some years. I was also involved as the head exorcist in a team of exorcists. I was also a researcher, a writer. I'd written articles for some of the leading newspapers in the nation, also some of the news magazines. But I wanted to start my own Raiders News Network, which would look at material that maybe other people wouldn't touch. Ufology, demonology, life on Mars, exoplanetary investigation, just all of the different kinds of things that perhaps nobody else was willing to touch, but where I felt that there was legitimate research into these areas of exopolitics and whatever that could be verified at least to some extent by legitimate persons. Mm-hmm. And so we launched Raiders News Network. We started doing everything that nobody else would do. And it just, for whatever reason, Alex, it caught on. Mm-hmm. And it started growing its own population. Today, there's millions of people per month go to Raiders News Network. And we never thought, you know, as a hobby, we never thought that it would catch on the way that it has, but we're very glad that it has.
Now, we're going to be talking tonight about biotechnology and transhumanism, but before we do that, which is in and of itself a complicated issue, right, could you give us a little bit of an overview over what is eugenics, the science that preceded transhumanism?
Well, eugenics. Now, you're a younger guy than I am. You know, you're in college. You're probably more up to date with some of the American history. I'm an old guy, and we tend to forget some of this stuff. But in a nutshell, I was still a young guy when eugenics was still a fact of life in America, and in fact, I can tell you that some of the some of our feelings about different ethnicities as an outgrowth of eugenics was happening when I was still a kid. Anyway, eugenics, the whole idea that you can breed a better specimen of humanity, that through social intrusion or law, that you can implement certain legislative processes that might be able to help people who we consider to be better people. You and I probably, when eugenics was early in its embryonic stage, early in American history, maybe in the very early 1900s, 1903, 1904, you and I would have fared fairly well because we're fair-skinned people, you know, where other people didn't do quite as well, either because their economic situation meant that they were poor, so they wound up on the street, and like a lot of street people in Portland today, who you know, because they're on the street and they don't have money to be able to afford health care issues, they wind up being subjected to different kinds of diseases and things that are just on the street. I mean, you're just barely trying to survive. These people were determined to be undesirables. Mm-hmm. How all that really started, if you go back even before that into Darwin's theory of evolution. When Darwin wrote his theory of evolution, one of the principal ideas was that the strong would prevail, mm-hmm, and the weak are going to die out. That's the whole idea, concept.
The basis that this is natural and this is the way it should be. This is
natural, this is the way it should be. And then Darwin's cousin, Francis, I
want to say Galton, but...
yeah. But anyway, he bought into this idea of Darwinism, and he came up with a concept called social Darwinism, mm-hmm, which meant that some of these ideas behind the evolutionary theory could apply to social rule and social law. Mm-hmm. And so he put forth this proposal that the people who are healthy, who are strong, who are good seed, even the old farmers used to use that term, good seed, bad seed. They applied it to animals and whatever.
And the German propaganda posters used to depict a strong man throwing the seed. Only the strong man will be the, yeah.
This came out after that. So social Darwinism was born kind of on the back of Darwin. Now it's important to note that both Charles Darwin and his nephew that proposed the laws that became known as, the ideas that became known as social Darwinism, as far as I understand, neither one of them ever really proposed misusing the feeble or people who were weak. It was people who kind of picked up on their ideas.
Darwin also noted that he regretted, in a way, part of what he discovered because he kind of had a feeling that this was going to lead to something else, and he acknowledged that.
Right, and it did, of course. It became known as eugenics. Social Darwinism turned into eugenics, in which you had early academics in American history in the early 1900s who put forth this proposal that if the theory of Darwin was true, we could follow this through with social Darwinism, so that on a sociological level, it would be good for both the economic and other benefits to Americans, early Anglo-Saxons, lighter-skinned people, who were the preferred stock. It would be beneficial to them and beneficial to our culture to be able to create laws that would encourage the propagating of the seed of good stock, at the same time discourage the propagating of the seed of bad stock. And bad stock was defined very early. In fact, this actually even applies to immigration. Early immigration in the U.S. We had all these people who were coming to the United States out of these different countries.
Right.
And, we saw dark-skinned people as undesirable. People who were poor who wound up on the street. A lot of these kids even that wound up in some of these institutions. These so-called adoption agencies were later on, through eugenics, they were sterilized so they couldn't even have children. They were just poor people that wound up on the street, or they were prostitutes. They were people who became addicted to drugs early on.
And they were even sterilizing women, African-American women, up until the 1970s.
That's right.
In this nation.
In fact, you know what? A lot of people don't realize.
In America.
And you know this probably because you're a university student, but a lot of people don't know this, is that there was something like 65,000 or more, 65,000 or more Americans who were sterilized against their will. This was a mandatory sterilization law. It's a dark part of American history, and but it occurred as a result of social Darwinism, and it happened. I was born in the 50s, and so it happened up past me. In fact, it was occurring all the way up through, I think, something like the 1970s. Before some of the last states passed laws that kind of changed some of those rules, but it included academics, some of the leading philosophers of the day. Now, people might also need to know that this actually went back long before American history. All the way back to Plato. Talking about how you would breed certain animals that you might own.
Ancient Babylon as well.
Ancient Babylon. Went on to Plato's, some of his students, especially Aristotle, who introduced Roman laws and things that would have to do with, but eugenics never really caught on in the same way as it did in early American history. And it's ironic, I don't, I brought you some advertisement from like some of the retailers. Mm-hmm. Like Lifebuoy Health Soap, so, talking about, yes, your son can get this job because he's of the right stock.
Oh, kind of like the movie Gattaca.
Oh yeah, I mean he's the danger is if you go out into the population where there's some of these lesser desired individuals who might be out there just randomly procreating and creating more imbeciles, and people need to know that in early American history, the terms that were used in eugenics, we use them today: morons, idiots, imbeciles.
Exactly.
But we use them tongue-in-cheek. But back then, these were actually being coined as psychological terms to describe some of these people who were living on the street and who were lesser fortunate.
Sure.
And in any case, there were people who were actually taken into courts of law, who wanted to get married, who wanted to have kids, but maybe some member of their family had Down syndrome or something. And these people were forcibly sterilized, taken into a hospital, and they were cut so that they couldn't have children.
You know, there's a term in sociology called moral relativity. That is, from 100 years to the next 100 years, what is moral, what is right, what is wrong changes. I mean, back then it was normal. Before the age of DNA and RNA, they would measure by the size of the nose, the size of the face, the size of the head, and determine if that was somebody more likely to be a criminal or not, based upon those physical attributes. Very strange time.
Very strange time, and you know, some of that is so now we would look at it and think, you know, how ignorant these people were, because they were looking at apes and things like that, and they were drawing some of the geometry of the face based on some of the structure of apes, and they were doing that because of their bigotry about some of the African slaves that had been captured and brought over to the United States. And so a lot of it goes back into that, and that's what I meant when I said, you know, in the 1950s, I still remember as a kid, some of the bigotry that existed as an outgrowth of what was happening in the eugenics movement, which is a dark part of American history. Now, when people tend to think of eugenics, though, they tend to think of Nazis, of Adolf Hitler, and what happened during the Nazi regime. And what they don't know is that the Nazis actually simply learned from us. They took a great deal of what we were teaching in our halls of academia through eugenics. They espoused some of those very ideas. You know, they actually gave honorary doctorates to some of our leading academics who were writing in the fields of eugenics.
Right. And in Germany, they had some German sociologists before Hitler's time. There were already proponents of eugenics.
Right. That's exactly right. And but we certainly encouraged part of what they were doing, but they took it to levels we never did. You know, thank goodness we never did do some of the things that the Fourth Reich did. In the sense that they kind of became impatient with what was happening with mandatory sterilization. You know, and a lot of people don't know that in Germany, they actually started not with the Jews or the Polish or anything like that. They actually started with their own people. Before they started gassing people in Dachau and people like that, in places like that with the Jews, they actually took Germans whom they viewed as being unworthy of life and procreation and progeneration. And they took those people into the gas chambers first. There was tens of thousands of Germans first that were put to death. But it was sometime after that, of course, during the war, that eugenics lost its patience with the idea of sterilization, because people continued to procreate. They thought, we've got to handle this quicker than this. And then came genocide. And that was the ultimate incarnation of the philosophy behind eugenics. And what happened then with some of the war trials, the Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg trials also identified the fact that much of the eugenics movement in Nazi Germany occurred as a result of some of the philosophical meanderings of American academics joining their German.
And what was funny about that time period during the collapse of Nazi Germany, it came down to, and we saw this with MK-Ultra, either the Soviets, the communists are going to get these Nazi scientists, or we are.
Right.
So, of course, we saw the evolution of eugenics now here in the United States. I want to move now into what you also call transhumanism, and it's also known by a number of other terms. What are some of the other terms people may be familiar with in terms of what we're talking about tonight?
Well, of course, the new form of eugenics could be introduced, I think is being introduced today through transhumanism. And now you mentioned other names of
biotechnology.
Yeah. Well, transhumanism is kind of a larger concept of people, including some of our leading academics at Oxford University, Stanford University, Trinity College, some of our other schools of law, where you have people who consider themselves to be transhumanists, meaning that they see the current sciences of biotechnology as being the gateway to leading to the next step in human evolution, the next step in human evolution. Now, there are people such as myself and bioethicist Wesley Smith and some others who believe that there could be some good things that come out of biotechnology, but we have concerns on some levels. And in particular, it has to do with in redefining what it means to be a human, and also what it might mean to other humans if we start redefining what it means to be a human, like through the personhood theory, which we can talk about in a little bit if you want to. It could have ramifications upon the care that we provide for persons who might not have certain levels of cognitive ability.
It's also the timing to what is happening right now politically with the construction of a world government.
Well, now you could slip very quickly over onto a prophetic side, and I don't know.
But I believe it's odd when we see consolidation of media, consolidation of food, and who owns the seed. Consolidation, consolidation, consolidation. If these same people are proponents of this new type of lifestyle, they don't have my trust. And that's, I think, one of the things that we can ask in the question is, what does it mean to be a human with all of these things going on?
Well, okay, so let's go from eugenics to the bigger idea of transhumanism. How transhumanism is related to eugenics is manifesting itself early on in ways like designer children. Mm-hmm. And you have that clip, from Gattaca that'll probably play later on in the show.
Yes.
The idea that in the future, this is a believable future too, by the way.
And very possible.
Yeah, it's very possible. Well, it's certainly possible in the sense that people already are preferring to choose children who could be genetically altered, at least in the sense of eradicating any disease genes that they might be born with. And look, that would appeal to all of us.
Right.
All of us want the best.
There are good aspects to Western science.
Certainly. Right. I mean, we want the best for our kids. We want the best for our progeny. We don't want them to suffer.
Right.
And all medicine, hopefully the goal of medicine and healthcare is to try to provide a better standard of living for all of us in terms of of our health, our ability to live without disease and without pain. I mean, I've got arthritis. I wish I didn't have it. If somebody gave me a pill tomorrow that would take away my arthritis, I'd take it.
I'm 27 in a few days, and I got gray hairs on my sideburns coming up. I can already see my hairline.
So this appeals to us, but there is a slippery slope. There is a slippery slope to Gattaca. There is a slippery slope that says there is a point at which transhumanism through biotechnology, transgenics, other forms of emerging sciences could lead to a point in time where some people don't have the same value as the new people. That you begin creating the us and them. You begin creating the enhanced humans and then the other humans. And obviously history has shown us that the other humans are not going to have the same benefits as the rest of us because economics, job placement, so many daily things are going to prefer the person who is more agile, who's quicker to think, who's faster on their feet. And so this is going to create a kind of class warfare which goes back to eugenics. But I will also tell you that I believe that it's inevitable. Transhumanism is inevitable. Now, I've gone out on a limb, and I agree with some of the leading journals, even some of the magazines like National Geographic, National Geographic ran an article called Our Soon Future, Our Future, How Weird and How Soon.
There's also This Year in Science, and I think I should take the time to go over this on next week's show. There's so many articles in this into biotechnology and merging of man and machine that most people wouldn't actually believe that the technology today exists, not the future, but this very moment. And it does raise that question repeatedly, what actually does it mean to be a human?
Well, it not only does it exist, but it's already being employed. So we're not talking about a theoretical science. Already in different countries around the world, including in places in the United States, we're already creating chimeras. We're already creating living organisms which could become intelligent species that are not humans as we know them or animals as we know them, because we're already creating transgenic.
They're doing this in Australia, are they not?
Well, they're doing it in various places. But we've already passed laws in the United States. Missouri has already passed a law allowing for the creation of human embryos for research purposes, and there is no part of that law, Proposition 2. There's no part of that law that would forbid the creation of human embryos that are also transgenic embryos, which means they are human-animal chimeras. There is a reason why George Bush, a couple of years ago, in a State of the Union address, called for legislation forbidding the creation of human-animal chimeras. He did that because his own Council on Bioethics had just finished their report to the government, and Leon Cass, who was the chairman of his Council on Bioethics, said this science is leading us to a point where we now are redefining what it means to be an animal, what it means to be a human, what it means to be a superhuman, or what it means to become a god. And this was the chairman. Francis Fukuyama followed up with that report from Leon Cass, saying that we are now redefining what it means to be a human. But more than that, he said this is the most dangerous technology in the history of mankind. It could lead to an extinction period in the sciences of mankind. So now, it's here though, and it's operating, and we're already doing it. And let me finish this last statement on eugenics, if I can, and then I'll jump forward from there, and we'll start talking about transhumanism. I apologize because I realize that
go ahead.
You know, we only have so much time tonight.
And then we'll play that clip of Gattaca.
Okay. Eugenics as an apparatus that's reflected in modern bioethics. Here's what some of the leading thinkers are saying. Dr. Robert Seensheimer, he's a molecular biologist, and he is the chancellor for the University of California at Santa Cruz, the initiator of the Human Genome Project. Sorry, because I'm reading this. He says, chimeras, human-animal crossbreeds, or parahumans might legitimately be fashioned to do dangerous or demeaning jobs. As it is now, low-grade work is shoved off on moronic and retarded individuals, the victims of uncontrolled reproduction. Should we not program such workers thoughtfully instead of accidentally by means of hybridization? Here's a quote from Dr. Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize laureate, 1962, co-discoverer of DNA. Crick also favored a scheme for licensing parenthood or a tax on children to encourage those people who might be more socially desirable to have children. He said no newborn infant should be declared human until it has passed certain tests regarding its genetic endowment, and that if it fails these tests, it forfeits the right to life. We can talk more about that later.
And this genome project is not even 12 years old, or not even?
That's right.
Yeah.
Dr. James Watson, the president of the Cold Spring Arbor Laboratory, New York, Nobel Prize laureate, co-discoverer of DNA, advocating the manipulation of the human genome, he said, if you're really stupid, I would call that a disease. So I'd like to get rid of that. People said it'd be terrible if you made girls pretty. I think it would be great. Well, this very much reflects some of the ideas.
Right, the ideology.
That was happening in eugenics. One more quote. Dr. Conrad Lorenz, who has a Nobel Prize for Physiology of Medicine 1973, in an article called Talking Eugenics Seriously. He says there is a close analogy between a human body invaded by a cancer and a nation afflicted with subpopulations whose inborn defects cause them to become social liabilities. Just as in cancer, the best treatment is to eradicate the parasitic growth as quickly as possible. The eugenic defense against the disintegent social effects of afflicted subpopulations is of necessity limited to equally drastic measures. When these inferior elements are not effectively eliminated from a population, then just as when the cells of a malignant tumor are allowed to proliferate throughout a human body, they destroy the body as well as themselves.
It seems that this also stems from a philosophy, almost religious, if you will, scientific religion, that they know what is right, that they know what effect these measures are going to have later on down the line of our species. You know, you look under a microscope of a genetically modified cell, whether it be plant life, modified food, or human, and it doesn't look the same as something that's natural. And I think on a microcosm level, it's going to possibly create some catastrophes, and I'm concerned about that. Maybe.
Well, and transhumanism really is a kind of religion. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at it, if you study what's being said by the major proponents of transhumanism, and I've talked with some of these guys directly. I've been on Dr. James Hughes' Change Surfer radio show, and we had gentlemen agreements to disagree. You know, we didn't have red face Pier 6 brawls. We didn't get into a fist fight. But these guys, you know, I look at what they have to say and I see religion in it. It's very much
false god.
Well,
some could call it that.
If you look at what they're proposing, first of all, I mean they're looking for a New Jerusalem. They're looking for a heavenly estate beyond which we have now. They look at humanity now as not being adequate to what they hope their future will be. So they're looking for something to descend down out of heaven and make them something better than they are. They also have prophecies. They prophesy the future. They look forward to a singularity in which technological advances are going to occur in such a rapid moment as to fulfill a kind of utopian future.
Now, a lot of my viewers are already seeing this on the Discovery Channel on their program 2057, particularly that program. And we can also see how the media works with mainstream science and promoting this philosophy, if you will. Yeah.
Right.
Now, we're about to see that clip of Gattaca.
Okay.
Could you set us up for this clip and what this movie is basically about?
Gattaca. Well, you know, I brought you the clip. It's been a long time since I watched it, but the whole idea is that there is a future situation in which, you know, people are selectively, genetically bred. And everything that we would think of in terms of bad genes, genes that might be inherent to diseases, are screened out through a process. But all the way in Gattaca, as I remember, all the way down to even bigoted opinions, poor dispositions about other persons. In fact, as I recall, the geneticist in the scene that we might be going to watch is a guy who is a black man, and he makes note of the fact that their child is of fair skin. And it's interesting to note the way he says that.
Fair skin. And with that, we will go to Gattaca. When we come back, we will continue on this conversation about the new genetics, eugenics, also known as transhumanism. And towards the end of the program, take your phone calls. We'll be right back.
Your extracted eggs, Marie, boys and two very healthy girls.
You look at the birth of surveillance cameras in just about every single grocery store, including your local organic grocery stores. It makes you scratch your head and wonder, what kind of future is it really going to be if, in fact, we incorporate transhumanism in this? This science that is driving, you know, our species without a vote, without congressional approval of some of these experiments, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on that, that sometimes these activities, these experiments, ways to engineer humanity just happens without the population even knowing it is happening. I find that to be very strange.
Well, certainly it's happening, partly because, you know, one of the government ploys is to keep the population simply ignorant of the way their tax dollars are being spent. Now, that's always been done in the history of the U.S., at least since early on until today, through black operations. You've had Jane's Military, others that have done investigative reports on how SAPOC budgets operate, how money is appropriated to black operations to be able to fund. There's a reason why in a government appropriation budgets a hammer costs $750. It's because there's a huge amount of money that's actually being back funneled into black operation budgets that are beyond congressional review, even to the point that many of the members of Congress are not aware of how they're aware that it's happening, but they're not aware of how the dollars are being spent in a particular way. And that's why early on, when it came to transgenics, I thought 1/4, I mean, my first investigation into this discovered that 1/4 of all U.S. Grants to technology was going to transgenics, and I thought, why? You know, 1/4 of all U.S. tax dollars that are going to fund scientific grants is going to transgenics. What is transgenics? I don't know what transgenics is.
And I'm curious with DARPA, which is really like from the movie Terminator 2 or Skynet, revolutionizing the way that we engage in warfare and policing, for that matter, domestically. Why do they have such a special interest in transhumanism when particularly they're a branch of the Pentagon dealing with, again, warfare?
Well, it kind of depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go.
I would say so.
Well, you know, at least on the surface level, DARPA has already published reports that have talked about the extended warfighter program.
Exoskeletons?
Well, not just exoskeletons. The extended, if a person watching this program tonight wanted to go to Google or Yahoo and type in the extended warfighter programs, they'll find out that DARPA has already published reports in which they have described the future soldier as a soldier who's not just robotically enhanced, as in wearing some kind of an exoskeleton, but they're talking about soldiers who have been biologically enhanced. They've been altered. Their DNA has been changed. They're talking about future soldiers who have been enhanced genetically, in that they have been transgenically combined with other kinds of species, including animals. DARPA has actually already published some of these reports, which are astonishing. That our own government is doing research.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, just that our own government is doing research into future enhancements of soldiers who can fight on without needing sleep, without these different things, right, but also have strength beyond what is natural for humans. And part of this is occurring because they are blending their DNA with the DNA of other species.
Wait, now this is strange, okay? This is an extension of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
It is. It absolutely is. Look, 2 weeks ago, Wired magazine wrote an article. The article was called Farm Animals. They spell that P-H-A-R-M. Farm Animals Crank Out Drugs. You probably already read the article. It was at Wired magazine last week. Well, before that article was written, Elizabeth Svoboda, who is a writer, who wrote the article and who is a writer for Wired magazine, contacted me at Raiders News Network. She said, I'm going to be writing an article on transgenic animals, in particular transgenic animals that are being used for the creation of different kinds of pharmaceuticals, in the hopes that through blending farm animals, whether that's goats, pigs, whatever, cows,
which they're already starting to clone anyway,
with the human DNA, that we might be able to produce human proteins in these animals in the hopes that through their milks or whatever other byproducts that we acquire from these farm animals, that we might be able to do testing that would lead to cures for Alzheimer's, cancer, other things like that. And actually, Alex, this is the way it's being sold. And who doesn't, you know, who could oppose this? Who could say, I'm against a cure for cancer? So it makes it very difficult to bypass the rhetoric and talk about the issue of what's actually happening in the redefinition of the human species and also the animal species through biotechnology and transgenics. Or even for that matter, the eventual harvesting of humans as a commodity through embryo farming. But I told her, I said, certainly, I'm very willing. She said, well, you know, you've got a couple of hours. So they gave me this really short period of time. She said, everybody that we're talking to, the scientific community, is very excited about transgenic animals in terms of the production of pharmaceuticals. So we need you to respond very quickly. They gave me like 1 day, actually gave me like 2 hours. And so I responded back very quickly. I gave them these things that I've got written right here. I said, these are some of the areas of concern that I could see in transgenics. A few days later, an article came out called Farm Animals Crank Out Drugs. I wasn't sure if that was the article for which they had interviewed me because I didn't see anything I had said in the article. And so I got a hold of her. I said, is this the article? She said, it is the article. I put a lot of the stuff that you said in the article, but when it came to the editorial process, they edited out the things that you said, and pretty much made a very positive, yay, isn't transgenic animal production a great idea for the future kind of an article. Very little in the article that would say there should be some red flags thrown up about this. If you want to talk about that, we can. If you want to go on, we can. Right. But I could tell you some of the things that I brought it to them very quickly that I thought should have been issues raised in terms of the production of transgenic animals.
Well, yeah, and I think for a lot of my viewers, we're beyond that. The media definitely has a very clear message that they are sending on how they view about this technology, just technology surveillance, the police state, the other issues we talk about as a whole. We don't feel our issues necessarily represented in the mainstream media. It's another reason why Access TV is very important. I want to ask you about, this is a side issue, but we were talking about it during the break, this new military weapon, because you did mention DARPA, that appeared on your website, the article on your website in Coast to Coast, about this new spotlight they're going to start using on rioters?
Yeah, well, I didn't write the article. It was published at Raiders News Network. I actually happened to be out of town, but I know it was published. I know it was picked up by Coast to Coast and others. This is another one of the super weapons that are being generated right now that are called I apologize.
Non-lethal. They call it non-lethal. I don't believe that for a second.
Right, non-lethal weapons. It probably could kill you.
But it's like something from Mars Attacks, basically a ray gun. And then I started thinking about that. I don't think it's going to be very long before we start seeing cops using laser guns. But anyway, we're talking about unmanned aerial vehicles flying over cities, beaming spotlights at rioters. That, in effect, paralyzes them. This is the future of policing. I think it's time to open up the phone lines. What do you think?
Hey, man, I'm
ready for some questions?
Sure, certainly.
503-288-4442 or 503-288-4448. Of course, tonight, keep your questions and your comments specifically on the issue of what we're talking about tonight. Tom, it's getting up to the top of the hour. Where do you think a lot of this is headed, according to your research and your experience? Researching some of these areas for so long?
Well, we made a leap there from talking about biotechnology all the way over to what I would think of in terms of psychotronic warfare. And there probably is a connection because when you involve DARPA, they're of course interested in everything that would give them field advantage in any field of warfare. Everything from controlling both the thoughts, the minds, what's happening on the cognitive level of enemies, but also, you know, if they're doing this testing on controlling the thoughts, the personnel on the ground of our enemies, the testing is happening here in the U.S.
And this has got to be like a Pandora's box, I would say, because if we have the technology, what are the chances of Russia, which is boosting its military by $250 billion over the next couple of years between now and 2015, of course, and you have some of the other growing nations, the growing economic strength of the EU. This is actually a worldwide phenomenon, just not the U.S., correct?
Well, China and the Soviet Union have been ahead of us on psychotronic warfare for a long time, at least on the surface, what we admit. Now, it's probable that, you know, in dark budgets that we've been doing research into psychotronic warfare for a long time before that. As far as biotechnology, Alex, what I hope is that we don't learn what I call the Brundlefly lesson. If you're familiar with this old movie, The Fly.
Yes.
Yeah, and remember the remake of The Fly where you had
I forget the actor's name, slipped my mind. The guy off Jurassic Park.
Yeah,
another interesting movie as
he's
well.
Off the guff, but he plays as, in the remake, he plays as a guy by the name of Seth Brundle, and you know, he's doing teleportation experiments. And during the course of doing these teleportation experiments, there's a fly that gets in one machine and he's in the other machine. And somehow during this teleportation experiments, his DNA is combined with the DNA of the fly. Now, I'm saying all this because DARPA has already admitted that they have an interest in extended warfighters who would have their DNA combined with the DNA of other species. And so he gets his DNA, you know, combined with this fly, and right away he's a transhumanist dream come true. He's got superhuman strength. He's got superhuman agility, superhuman eyesight. He's got the sexual proclivities of an African lion. But then something starts happening, and he starts becoming a monster. Now, we've seen already in genetically modified crops, they do things that we can't predict. They do things that we can't foresee. So what do we know about what's going to happen with genetically modified humans? There is this possibility that that a Pandora's box, as you said, could be opened, that something can get out of the box, that it can begin blending with, through interspecies cohabitation, it can begin blending with our natural population. And it might do things. It might introduce diseases for which we are not ready for. It might do other things. It's all kinds of unpredictable things.
Now I'm wondering, I know we don't have, and this requires a series of DVDs to explain the other phenomenon of genetically modified food and the necessity to destroy a natural seed and create an artificially made one. How do you feel that, how does that play a part in all of this? Monsanto owning the seed, what we're seeing with genetically modified cows and pigs, soon to be sold at a fast food restaurant near some of you.
Yeah.
How does that fit into this puzzle?
Could I have some cheese with my clone burger? I mean,
I'll have a genetically modified radioactive Coke with that, please.
Double with cheese. We simply don't know. A very good friend of mine, you know, Dr. Stan Monteith.
Excellent.
Yeah, and he's a writer for My Raiders News Network. He's been a friend of mine for a long time. He's got DVDs out about this. He's a medical doctor. I was on his show one night when I asked him that very question. In fact, I had been chosen by a movie, by Cloud 10 Pictures. They had made a movie with Louis Gossett Jr. and some other people in there about aliens and like that. But part of this film had to do with telekinesis. And I'd been studying transhumanism, which, like Nick Bostrom, some of these guys hope that by enhancing humans, we might be able to adapt to ourselves certain abilities that only the animal kingdom right now has, the ability to see light waves beyond our perception, things like that. In fact, in the Bible, you know, there's evidence that animals can see into the spirit world. They can see angels. They can see things we can't see. And transhumanists have an interest in being able to move past our normal modalities. So when I was on Dr. Monteith's show, and I've been on his show many, many times, all of his different shows, I asked him one time, though, I said, "You're a medical doctor. Do you believe there's anything to this?" He actually started crying. He had just come back from a medical conference for doctors, and they were talking about transhumanism, they were talking about the future of biotechnology, and they were talking about this as not only being a possibility, but being the ultimate future. And this is the reason why Stanford University, Oxford University, all these different universities right now are holding these legal clinics on establishing what will be the legal precedents for the constitutional protections for people who are posthumans. Even the Birkbeck Law School is talking about how will you analyze a crime scene which was conducted by a posthuman, somebody who might be something that's something like part wolf, like an X-Man. It won't even think the way we think, and so the rules that we have determined over a long period of time for crime scene analysis won't even work with a person whose instincts are only part human, and they might be part wolf or something like that. So it raises all of these ethical questions, these issues that are just completely beyond.
Even Roberts, when they were preparing to clear him for Senate, one person had asked them, or pointed out to him that he would be asked in his lifetime how he feels about microchip implants, whether they should be mandatory to be implanted in people or not. And that's right. Questions you wouldn't think. We have a phone call,
okay,
and we're going to go ahead and let them through. You are on the line here and Outside the Box with Tom Horn. How are you?
Yeah, are you talking to me?
Hi.
Yeah, I wanted to know how you felt about life extension as it applies to genetic modification.
I'm glad you asked that. That was another area that we wanted to go towards as well.
Well, here's the thing, and I said this when I was with James Hughes on his radio show, Change Surfer radio show, and other radio shows. I'm not against technology, and I certainly am not against anything that would procure for all of us a better life, a healthier life. I don't want to die. I'm old enough now that all of this stuff is.
We're not right-wing Christians that say it's wrong to go to the hospital.
Well, may I ask how old you are?
I'm in my 50s.
Okay, me too. I was concerned. I've been concerned about life extension. I mean, we all reach our limits, and it seems to me that genetic modification is one good way to get there. And I heard you talking about some things there that, improvements in a species through genetic modification. If we can keep track of what's going on there, what's really going on, and I hear, you got like loose cannons going on in your mind there with what's happening to the genome, I guess. But it seems to me like a damn good idea to improve people. I mean, we've improved our lives in many other ways. Vaccinations, you could go on and on. I don't see this, as long as we have control, democratic control over what's happening here, it doesn't strike me as a negative thing.
That's the ticket, my friend. You have no control, zero control over this technology. Zero.
Why do you
no
say
oversight,
that?
None of it. We don't have any oversight in how far they're going to push this.
Why do you say that?
Why do I say that?
Why do you say we have no control?
Most of these measures that are being implemented, these sciences, people don't even know about, period. The majority, stark majority, vast majority of the population don't even know it exists. They watch it, they view it on CNN, on Discovery Channel. Right. They're not intimately given the facts of the pros and cons of the issue. And I know that some people aren't
Don't you see that as a good
worried.
reason?
Don't you see that as a good thing?
No, I wasn't going to say that. Don't you think that's a good reason to try to bring these things to light?
Well, that's what we're doing here tonight.
You're here, yeah, but
right.
But I mean, if you open this up so that there's some transparency there, can't these things become, a very good thing? Foods that are better, maybe foods that prevent diseases.
It is a hypothetical question, but I will go ahead and throw it back to Tom, let him respond.
Well, and these are the very questions that need to be raised. Now, different people, some people who have, let's say, a biblical worldview, they have a problem with the idea that if you were merging human species with the animal species, that then you're playing God and you're also crossing a species barrier. Because in the Bible you have these rules about not crossing the species, that each species should reproduce after its own kind. But even if you don't buy into a biblical worldview, there is a question. Let's say you're strictly an evolutionist, you're a Darwinist, or like Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, you subscribe to the chaos theory. You have these questions that say, as I'm riding down the road as fast as I can go in this Jeep, and there is a Tyrannosaurus Rex chasing me, who thought this was a good idea? that by introducing these new species, or even if these are species that have not been on the earth for millions of years, by reintroducing these into our current environment, what will the impact on the current environment be? And they could do things to the environment that we're not prepared for. They could change the balance of nature. They could change the balance of science.
Well, sure, but if you want to, suppose you, instead of a species, you want to introduce a particular gene from a species that, say, you know, like a tortoise, say, that lives to be 230 years old. If we can figure out which gene or genes are responsible for the aging curve on that particular animal, then, and we could introduce it to you, and now you're 32. You know, or you see what I'm saying? You see where I'm going?
Well, here's something. Now, I do think that there could be some good things that will come out of genetic engineering. I do have cautions about when it comes to crossing the species barrier, but putting that one question aside, I do think that genomics, genetic engineering, that the mapping of the human genome is ultimately going to probably lead to cures for some diseases, which could be viewed as a very good thing. If we can learn how to, because all medicine in a way is tinkering with what's happening in terms of our genetic disposition. If we take, whether we take aspirins, or if we go into a hospital, we have cancer and we have radiation treatment, we're trying to change what is occurring genetically within our physical makeup. So I think that there are some very good things. My main cautions come with when we start talking about altering what has happened, either in terms of what either creation or evolution has not allowed. And if those two, and so those cover both worldviews, creation or evolution, whatever it has not allowed, I think that these test subjects and these test situations then need to be done in very, very careful environments, because we could open a Pandora's box. And we're already seeing in genetic modification of foods things that have occurred. Arpad Pusztai, whose work was done with rats that were fed with genetically modified potatoes that were created through Monsanto. Other kinds of field investigations that were supported by other independent investigations have showed us that genetic modification can do things that we don't understand and we're not ready for.
Well,